organization that supports people who have disability and employment and day services. I'm also the Government Affairs Chair for MOHR, which is a statewide association of over 100 organizations that provide employment and day services throughout Minnesota. Thank you so much for the brief opportunity to speak before you today. Legislators are being asked to address many critical needs this session, and the current crisis our state is facing in the lack of access for individuals to waiver-funded disability services is definitely one of them. I want to provide just a few important historical considerations regarding the reimbursement for waiver-funded services for people with disabilities in Minnesota. First, one thing to note that it is a unique characteristic of our service sector compared with other services that are funded by the state, that almost 100% of our organization's revenue comes from the state and local government programs. The legislature sets the amount that we're paid, which determines the resources we have available to pay staff and other program expenses. We cannot compensate for low legislatively set reimbursement rates by shifting costs for people who are private pay or other funding sources. Second, in 2013, all waiver-funded disability services transitioned to an entirely new rate system called the Disability Waiver Rate System. Usually we refer to that as DWRS, fondly, I'm sure, right? As a longtime provider of waiver-funded disability services, I was actively involved in the development, negotiation, and implementation of DWRS. Before DWRS, service reimbursement rates were set at the local level. And then the federal government required that Minnesota implement a statewide rate-setting methodology to eliminate the variation in rates throughout the state. When the DWRS system was enacted, it was done in a manner that was budget neutral. This resulted in some providers seeing large rate reductions in service reimbursement rates and others seeing rate increases just from the implementation of DWRS. And in the half-decade preceding the passage of DWRS, we saw flat funding in all of those years, and in 2 of them, we actually had rate cuts. So the budget-neutral DWRS system was enacted on a system that was already underfunded. Third, when DWRS was implemented, a financial rate mechanism called banding was used to mitigate large reimbursement rate swings upwards or downwards. With the implementation and eventual phasing out of banding, it became understandably confusing to follow the impacts of waiver-funded disability service rate changes, as it involved the financial impacts on hypothetical DWRS rates, as well as rates that were held flat through banding. First, during the beginning of banding, rate increases of 7% were enacted. Later, when the first inflationary adjustment was to be applied, an additional 8.5% increase was projected for the reimbursement rates on average. However, between the state and federal governments, it was determined that only 1.5% of that 8.5% increase could be applied. Much of these increases were withheld until banding expired. At that time, it could be argued that providers saw an 8.5% rate increase in addition to the 7% for a total of 15.5%. However, again, the inflationary adjustment was eventually reduced by 7%. So using the 15.5% or 14% number is misleading, as the increase included the 7% from 2013 and 2014, which was the same increase other providers received, and did not include the 7% reduction, and did not take into account the rate variations that were caused by the implementation of DWRS. And yes, that is really confusing to follow, I know. We have some members of MOHR who've been hearing from their legislative contacts about a 27% rate increase in our sector since 2020. We looked at data from 2010 until now, and our data shows that the rate increases that were provided average 1.2% over that entire time. And that includes the 7% that was taken away. So, fourth, DWRS does include automatic rate adjustments that are built in the formula, and a rate adjustment is currently being implemented on a rolling basis throughout 2022. These automatic rate adjustments are appreciated, and things would be much worse without them. However, the data used to inform the rate adjustments is based on data published in the spring of 2019, which uses 2018 data. So the adjustments being applied this year reflect a reality of 2018. As we are all painfully aware and have heard today, the wage-related pressures and challenges of 2022 are a lot different than 2018. Last and most importantly, regardless of the details behind exactly what rate increases were implemented when, the fact of the matter is that current state set rate reimbursement for these services do not provide for wages and benefits that allow us to hire the staff we need to support people with disabilities to live full and meaningful lives. For example, the current DWRS wage rate for the reimbursements that are set for RISE, the base wage rate in the formula is the entry-level rate we currently use to hire people with limited experience in our service sector. Because it uses dated wage information, DWRS does not reflect our average wages or what it takes to attract and retain high-quality staff to support our community members. Even after increasing our entry wage rate 25% since 2019, we struggle to get applicants and have 70 roles open to fill this year to serve the over 200 people that are waiting to return to services, and that's just at RISE. The Senate HHS proposal helps address our current crisis through adjustments to the DWRS system that would be made based on more up-to-date market data rather than over 30-month-old data that's used today. It also acknowledges the very real difference in the average wages paid to direct support professionals compared to other occupations in Minnesota. Again, we know that legislators are being asked to address many critical needs this session. On that list must be taking action to increase access to waiver-funded disability service for all people with disabilities in Minnesota. It's vital to the well-being of people in our state. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you. Representative Pinto, you asked for math, and there you go. What's up? What do you want to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to the testifiers. And again, in an area where we're helping people to live in dignity and supporting them. And so thank you so much to all of you. I did have a question for Ms. Ostrowski. I hope I'm saying your name sort of maybe vaguely correctly. You had, I noticed that in the list of the pressures that that the folks who are doing this work are feeling, my ears perked up when I heard you use the phrase childcare. I know that that's something that's been a real squeeze, and I believe that you all even had a proposal to support DSPs specifically with childcare because it's such a big need. And I just want to see, could you just talk about kind of the extent to which that's a pressure that workers are feeling, kind of connection between affordable and accessible childcare and the work that you all are doing?
Sure, Ms. Ostrowski, and briefly for now.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Pinto. Yes, several of our team members have had to make difficult decisions about whether or not they are coming to work for their shifts or whether they need to stay home with their children. So the ARM bill that was brought forward for relief to childcare workers is very important as well, because this goes hand in hand. You know, if we don't have good child care for our team members, then it's tough for our team members to get to work. So child care is definitely very important to our team members.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Ostrowski. I feel like I've heard the same thing. I probably should have brought that up in the first topic, nursing homes. I feel like I've heard the same thing for long-term care, a real squeeze. So thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thanks to the testifiers so much for joining us. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Sure. We'll take questions from the House first. Representative Liebling or Pinto or Gomez or Albright, do you want to have any questions?
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't really have so much questions. I thought that, again, Representative Pinto, I think, is spot on. You know, folks are, I've known Mrs. Ostrowski for years, and I have so appreciated her advocacy. She's a tremendous source of not only advocacy, but information. And she does a tremendous job at Hiawatha Homes. I mean, it is, you know, her work is well respected throughout our whole community. And anyway, couldn't say enough great things about her. And yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question that, the other, of course, side of this is that the folks that are doing this important work absolutely deserve to have a living wage and absolutely deserve to take care of their children and not have to worry and all of that thing. And, we are just all in a really difficult spot, all of us. And a lot of this is that workforce dynamic that we've all talked about so much. How do we make sure that part of this is just driven by the workforce shortages, period. Employers are fighting over folks to, and that's driving up the wages, which honestly, I think that's kind of a good thing that people are making those better wages, especially because they have higher costs and on and on. But this is indeed a very challenging situation that we're all in. And, personally, I don't think it's a time to cut taxes for the wealthy. I think it's a time to dedicate more resources, but across the board, because I think as Representative Pinto is pointing out, if we'd have to pay a whole lot more if people if their childcare bills are out of sight and they have nowhere to bring their kids. And, these things are all linked together. So somehow we have to figure this out and make it really possible for people to work and do these jobs that we know that many folks that do this work as DSPs, once they find out what it is, they love it and they want to do it. They love the people they care for. And we want to make that possible across the board. So this is the challenge we all face. And thank you, Mrs. Strowski and the others for testifying.
Thank you, Representative Liebling.
Yeah, well, thank you. And maybe just a little comment. The other group mentioned burning through reserves. And it sounds like you're paying more than what you're getting, Ms. Noren or Ms. Ostrowski. Do you want to comment, Ms. Noren, just on your experience with how you're making ends meet?
Absolutely, Chairman Habler and members of the committee. We definitely have run at an operational deficit since the pandemic started at RISE. We're fortunate enough to have in our 50-year history some reserves saved, but that's not sustainable. In 2020, we also benefited from some federal relief funds, and so we were able to provide quarterly retention bonuses to our team, which made a huge difference in helping us keep people through the pandemic. But in order to be sustainable for the future and continue to meet the needs that are out there, we're going to need a way to have our rate methodology match the actual expenses that we have.
Right. Thank you. Ms. Ostrowski, just want to do a minute on your reserve thing, just so we can get the same context, and then we're going to move on to the next topic.
Similar, Hiawatha Homes has been providing services for 45 and a half years, and our foundation has some reserves and investments. So we have been going to our foundation and asking our foundation for some help and support. And so we will be getting help from our foundation this year. And also we've been writing grants for program support. We actually did a DSP, Support Your DSP campaign and fundraising through our family members and stakeholders and asking them for support, and received tremendous support. Our goal was $15,000, and our family members and community members gave $34,000 for that campaign. But running campaigns every year and asking the foundation every year and writing grants every year is not going to sustain our services long term. But we are greatly appreciative of the help that we are getting from our community and our foundation.
Just one last question. Do you know offhand, Ms. Ostrowski, just based only on the Medicaid reimbursements of the federal and state, what are you running short? Do you know, what are you expecting for 2022? Do you have any idea?
For 2022, without support from our foundation, I just asked our CFO this question prior to our meeting. I knew you would ask me, Chairman Abler, and without support from any of those other resources, we'd be running in a $800,000 deficit.
Well, all right. Well, thank you.
Abler?
Representative Schultz, is that you?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
I just want to acknowledge that We have heard a lot of this testimony this session and in previous years, and the House DFL is the party that was responsible for increasing putting in a competitive workforce factor and reforming the DWRS to make sure we have these inflationary increases. So there's a commitment for that. And last year we bumped up, we increased the timing for those inflationary increases at a time when every single House Republican voted against that bill last year. So I just want the public to know that the DFL is very committed to addressing this crisis that we've just heard about in group homes. And I think that we're in a difficult position when Republicans in the Senate want to give tax cuts of billions of dollars to wealthy families. And if this is indeed a crisis, then I think we do need to have you prioritize and move your caucus to move those resources into these areas where we're hearing about this crisis of workforce shortage and the need to increase reimbursement rates, because these rates, when we increase them, are hundreds of millions of dollars in the out years or the tails. And so giving permanent tax cuts to wealthy families in Minnesota can put us in this difficult position where we have to try to prioritize with the very limited budget. We want to do all of these reimbursement rate increases to meet the needs of Minnesotans. And to do that, we're going to need a bigger budget target.
I'm going to leave it at that for the time being.